David didn't take it very well at first when he was told that he would have to go to his mother-in-law's house. It was the same every year. Every year, his wife and mother-in-law begged him to help with the harvesting of all the goodies that grew in huge quantities in the beds, bushes, and trees on Linda's property. In his son-in-law's opinion, all those fruits, vegetables, and berries should have been bought at the store rather than spending the nicest and warmest days of the year growing and caring for them. But the female half of his family loved what they grew with their own hands, so David had to put up with the status quo and only occasionally help his relatives. On that day, after trying hard to persuade her husband to help her mother once again, Jessica felt sick. Her temperature rose quickly, and it became clear that David would have to go alone. It was too late to refuse. After all, they had promised to help, and Linda's huge plantation was indeed full of ripe fruit ready to start spoiling at any moment. After assuring himself that his wife was not seriously ill and could handle the treatment on her own, the man jumped into the car and set off late that night. The drive to the house wasn't a long one, so David wasn't able to get there until around 2 in the morning. He was angry at the traffic and the fact that the coming weekend was not going to go according to his script. He was looking forward to a well-deserved vacation, and now it all had to be put on hold. He sighed, trying to shake off his irritation, and continued driving, scanning the dimly lit road ahead with his eyes. On top of that, his mother-in-law didn't open the gate for a long time, locking herself in as usual. He had to call her cell phone to wake her up. In general, David loved his mother-in-law and was on good terms with her, but moments like this really annoyed him. It wasn't just the inconvenience, but the fact that she was sometimes so careless, knowing he was coming, but always kept her waiting. It had been a chilly night, and standing out in the cold only made his irritation grow. "You could have stayed and waited for me," he muttered quietly, but then he heard the sound of the deadbolt being unlocked. He was about to voice his grievances to her, but the appearance of his mother-in-law confused him. Linda met him in a nightgown that emphasized all the charms of her body. The nightgown was short, showing off Linda's beautiful legs. The fabric hugged her curves, and she looked sleepy but alluring, with her eyes half open and her hair disheveled. "Hi, Dave. Sorry it took so long. I couldn't find my keys anywhere. Good night." She smiled apologetically, but there was something else in her gaze, something almost tantalizing that he couldn't understand. "It's okay. Let's get some rest," David muttered as he continued to scrutinize his mother-in-law's unusual outfit. He tried to look away, but his eyes kept returning to her figure. He felt a slight twinge of guilt, but quickly dismissed it as fatigue. Having had a good night's sleep, David got up close to noon. Still, the trip to his mother-in-law's house had its advantages. Here, he recuperated many times better than in the city, thanks to the silence and fresh air. Linda did not interfere with him, knowing perfectly well that a man should be given a rest after the end of a hard work week and the beginning of a new job. Besides, she always felt out of place because she could see and understand that he was not thrilled with such help. She appreciated his eagerness to please, so she tried to repay him in kind. And now, when her son-in-law came out of the guest bedroom, a delicious and hearty breakfast was waiting for him. On the table were scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, fresh fruit, and a pot of hot coffee. The aroma filled the air, and David's stomach rumbled appreciatively. "Wow, Linda, if I eat all that, I definitely won't be able to keep working." He laughed, genuinely surprised at how much food she had prepared. It was like a feast for a king. His mood was clearly better now than it had been the night before. The disappointment dissipated, replaced by the cozy warmth of the cabin and the mouth-watering smell of breakfast. "And eat as much as you want. I won't take offense," Linda said with a smile as she watched him devour the food. "Whatever you say." "What are our plans for the day?" asked David, with his mouth full of toast. "I suggest we start with apples, then move on to the beds. Anyway, we'll see as we go along. By the way, the river is very warm right now. I swim every day, so I highly suggest we go to it at the end of the day." "That's a great suggestion." "I like it a lot." "Okay, I'll leave you two to finish your food and go outside." Linda's mention of the river popped into his head. The idea of cooling off in the river after a long day of work seemed like the perfect reward. The half-day flew by so quickly that David didn't even notice it had passed. Numerous baskets, bags, and other containers were full of ripe fruit. The son-in-law had even exceeded the plan Linda had made for the day. This was aided by her appearance. On this hot day, Linda was wearing only short shorts and a tight t-shirt. The fabric fit her body, showing off her trim figure. David had found her attractive before, but now he couldn't take his eyes off the active, mature woman. Her confidence and energy made her even more attractive. "Thank you, Dave." "You've been a great help to me," Linda said, her face glowing with satisfaction and sweat. "You're welcome." "I'll do some more work tomorrow before I leave," David replied, wiping the sweat from his forehead and trying not to look at Linda for too long. "That's great. By the way, remember the river? You can show me the way." She smiled, her eyes meeting his for a second longer than necessary. Soon, Linda and David were headed in the right direction, and within 10 minutes they were there. It was wild and surrounded on all sides by trees and other thickets. Just a paradise for those who like to sunbathe and swim in solitude and silence. The quiet rustling of the leaves and the gentle sound of the water created the perfect escape from the world. This is a wonderful place. "Oh, crap. I didn't bring my swim trunks," David said, scratching the back of his head and feeling a little awkward. "Don't worry. There's no one here. I often bathe here naked myself," Linda said nonchalantly, and her words caught David off guard. He felt his cheeks heat up as he tried to think of what to reply. "Oh, I didn't lock the gate." Her paranoia flared again, and she took off in the direction of the house. David watched her go, her shorts riding up slightly as she hurried away. That's even better, David thought, stripped off his clothes and dove into the water. The cold water refreshed his skin, washing away the sweat and dirt that had accumulated over the day. As he swam, Linda's words that she herself had bathed here naked kept echoing in his mind. Why had she said that? Was she implying something special, or was it just a casual conversation? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her words. After a good swim, he waded to the shore and lay down on the grass. Completely dry, in a few minutes, he hurried back to the house. There, Linda was still working in the garden, her hands covered in dirt as she dug up weeds. "Enough work. Let's go for a swim too," David said, grinning. "Yeah, I was just about to when you got here," she replied, wiping her hands on her shorts, and her eyes met his briefly. Soon, Linda was heading towards the river again, and David decided to stop by the nearest store to get something for the evening. He selected a bottle of whiskey and took a big gulp straight from the bottle. The drink burned his empty stomach, and David immediately had the mischievous idea peeking at his mother-in-law. Quickening his pace, he quickly made his way to the familiar spot. He was just in time to see Linda slowly emerging from the water. She was really swimming in only a bikini, her wet body glistening in the sun. The water droplets glistened on her skin like diamonds. She didn't realize that she had become the object of her son-in-law's close observation. He watched Linda turn her back to him and expose her breasts to the sunlight. He couldn't help but admire her confidence, how comfortable she felt in her own skin. Nice, he thought, taking another sip. Over the next half hour, Linda immersed herself in the water twice more, and then unwittingly showed herself off to her son-in-law. At these moments, David felt like a schoolboy peeking at adults. His heart raced with excitement. As Linda began to dress, David turned and hurried home, but stepped on a dry branch that gave away his presence. He cursed under his breath, hoping she hadn't heard. Of course, Linda didn't see him in the bushes, but she clearly realized she wasn't alone in that clearing. When she returned home, she found David at the table. He was setting out appetizers and making it clear that he had been waiting for her for a long time. Linda appreciated that, for she herself was not averse to a sip or two before bedtime. She didn't look any less attractive in David's eyes as she changed into more closed clothing. The more they sat there, the more closely David watched Linda. Her laughter was intoxicating, her smile disarming. And the way she looked at him, something sparkling in her eyes that he couldn't decipher, made his heart sink in his chest. Eh? Why not give it a try? We only live once. He made a decision and began to turn all conversations to frank topics. To his surprise, Linda supported them, not at all embarrassed by his words. She leaned closer, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. Imagine someone was watching me by the river today. Imagine even an old woman like me is of interest to someone. She laughed. Her cheeks flushed slightly from the alcohol. Don't say that to anyone else. What an old woman you are. You're a very beautiful woman. Do you really think so? Linda asked, with burning eyes, vulnerability sounding in her voice. Of course I do. What's more, I'm willing to admit that I'm the one who peaked. Dave, really? She looked up at him, her eyes widening with surprise and something else, something akin to excitement. I said I liked you. Of course I liked you before, and now I have such a good reason to admire you. His voice was steady, and his eyes never took his eyes off her face. You flatter me. Linda was embarrassed by the words she heard, and the realization that her own son-in-law was watching her by the river. Her cheeks flushed even more, and she bit her lower lip, not knowing what to say next. The whiskey made itself felt, spurring David into action. He leaned closer, his heart pounding. You know what? I don't want to watch from the sidelines anymore. I want more. David moved closer to Linda and began kissing her hands. At first, she tensed, her body stiff with surprise, but soon, probably under the influence of the whiskey, she passionately joined in the process. Her clothes fell to the floor, and with them the remnants of shyness. The bed was a stone's throw away, and how they got there, neither of them could remember anymore. The next day, harvest was out of the question. David ran to the store, and the revelry continued. The atmosphere was different now, charged, electric. Every glance they exchanged was filled with unspoken words, Every touch lingered a little longer. It was as if a dam had burst, and neither of them wanted to pick it up piece by piece just yet.